Start off. I'm Michael, and I'm making a Rb30 turbo motor that's going to be making 300 rear wheel kilowatts by the time I finish with it. So you motherfuckers better watch the fuck out when you're on the road. But there's no videos on the internet of how to do it. It's forums and shit like Kelly Turbo, Skylines Australia, old Skylines. I can't remember what the other one's called, something Commodores. But just do a search of like VL or Rb30 and it should come up with something. I'm going to make a video on it, so we're going to go with this is step one of what you should be doing. I keep on doing this, I'm so fucking lazy. So what I've done is I've pulled the motor out of the car, like completely pulled it out. And stripped it down. So right now, that block has absolutely no bolts left in it. It's got nothing left in it. All the shit I could take off, I did. So we'll start off with what you first should be doing if you're going to do this rebuild or convert it from Rb30 NA, which is naturally aspirated, which is no turbo or forced induction of any kind, and turn it into a turbo. So this is going to be a really long series of videos. So grab your favorite seat, sit the fuck down, and just hear my jibber jabber. I sound like a retard, don't I? Yes, I do. Alright, so first of all, disconnect. If you're putting it back in the same car, don't cut anything. Remember where it all goes. Get a workshop manual. That should help you with removing the motor. It should help you with a lot of stuff actually. You should be able to do this all by yourself. Other than the turboing part, you should be able to rebuild this motor. Not perfectly, but not far off it. If you get the cash flow. I'm not going to say I do, but I do. So it makes it a bit easy, doesn't it? So pull off everything, everything. Get like some cupboards. I don't go for Collingwood, don't fuck with me. Like 3 big cupboards. Start putting all your shit like I couldn't give a fuck if it's pistons and they're used. What the fuck is in there? Cause my mum would kick my ass if I threw them in the recycling. Alright, I've got everything in here. From the original fucking mounts that go to your gearbox off the front of your fucking motor, back of your motor. Starter motor, this is fucked. But I'm rebuilding it. I'll show you how. This thing, part of your emissions control, it's full of little carbon grains, and there's fuel vapor that goes into there and it turns it into a liquid. Oh, something like that. I don't know. Be careful with this thing. It's on the back of your plenum. Say this is your motor, right? You pop the hood, and you've got your head sitting there, your rocker cover and all that shit, and there's that thing that flows over that way. That's called a plenum. That's what your air flows through. And this thing bolts onto the back. I'm just going to get right into detail here. It is called an ACC valve. AAC valve. Just after reading it. What it does is basically it's an idle air control valve. So you don't really need it, but you really do at the same time. All it does is you start your motor, and when you're sitting there and you got no load, nothing is drawing power from the motor, alternator, yeah, that's so what. You adjust your idle to that anyway, so it takes the load off that. But this bolts onto the back of your intake plenum into, I feel like I'm talking to preschoolers. When you rev the car, all you're doing is opening up a flappy paddle at the front that lets air in. The more air and fuel you can get into your little tiny 3-cylinder, 3 litre automatic cylinder, the faster it's going to go, or rev. And that's already adjusted. But that thing that I just showed you, that idle air control valve, it's pretty important to this. So when you start your car and you turn your air conditioner on and it puts a heap of load on your motor, or not heaps, but it puts a decent bit of load on your motor's going to want to die. Like, it'll just stall. It'll just slow down and stop. Too much power's being drawn. The motor can't make that much power at idle. So that, if your idle dies down, that opens up and lets a bit more air in and basically revs your car back up. That's why when you turn it on and turn it off, your car revs up and down. That's basically that thing doing its thing. It's the dumbest fucking... It's not the dumbest invention ever, but it's a cunt if you want to make your own intake plenum. But we'll keep going. Like, by pulling shit off. I got one. This cupboard here is shit that I might be keeping. Some of it I am keeping, definitely, but shit like, here's your throttle body. I'm not keeping that because it's too small. Pistons, they're getting thrown out, but I'm using them for measuring shit. Dipstick, oil pickup. Rear, this is your main. This goes on the back of your crank and runs on that face there, on your crankshaft. That's your crankshaft there. This thing runs on that, and that's called your rear seal. It's like a rubber, like that. 202s use like a rope. It uses a lot of drag though. Like, having one of those, but rope ones put a lot of drag in your motor. Stock oil pump. Piece of shit. Lower intake plenum. Don't worry about that. Crank girdle. That's a main stud girdle. That's all the shit that I gotta clean and stuff. This cupboard's basically the cupboard of good parts that are going back on that are already done. Alternator. I rebuilt that. Just turn down. There's like, take it to an alternator rebuilder. That's probably the easiest. Other than that, if it still works before you take it off the car, don't touch it. Maybe put new brushes in it. Watch YouTube videos on how to put brushes in. It's pretty simple. Water pump. This was installed on the motor, I don't know, 12 months before the cunt died. So it's still good. Check for bearing play. If it's got any at all, replace it. Because there's a decent bit of fucking around to get that thing out again once it's already in your car. So there's a few things you have to be replacing. You've probably all seen a pod filter. Buy one of those. That's called an oil catch can. We'll go into depth later. Distributor. This distributor. I'm gonna be real fucking basic here, actually. Yeah, I'm gonna be real fucking basic. Hell, I'll grab the coil as well. This is a coil. There's a thing called a primary and a secondary coil. Those two things, power goes to. Alright? I don't know which one, but it goes to it. Power goes in and is swirling around this thing. Like the outside one, that one there. Swirls around it. And then there's this thing. This is like, I don't know how many volts that is. And then there's this thing with all copper windings in. And there's electricity spinning around there. And it comes out the end here. See? Comes out the end. Travels along a thing called a fucking spark cable. Or plug wire. There's some there. And goes into this. And then the gear on the bottom, which is driven by your camshaft, drives a rotor around. The rotor inside a cap turns a certain way. There's actually a fucking arrow on it on which way it goes there. And it spins around and it goes past each one of these. And these go to your cylinders, to your spark plugs. And when it points to one, it's basically touching it. So it's very easy for it to jump across to that. It doesn't even jump, it basically just goes across to it. And then down to your spark plugs and kaboom.
football game.
We have ignition.
Absolutely crazy. Alex from
Anyway,
Claire,
there's a thing in there called a crank angle sensor. You need to get that checked because they fuck up pretty easy too. I don't know how they fuck up. I think it's just age. But all the crank angle sensor does, I'm going to go into this as well. Crank angle sensor is a disc of steel, right? And it's got little holes in it. I'll open it up later and show you. It's got little holes in it. And as your distributor turns around, there's a thing called a LED, which is a light emitting diode. Well, you see them on the front of your fucking TV with the light up things. You press the remote and the like red button comes on. Yeah, it's called a light emitting diode. And there's two eyes in there, inside that distributor. And as it goes around, the light goes through a hole. There's 360 of them. And the eye picks it up and tells the computer where the crank is and references it to your crank angle sensor. So it knows where your rotor is compared to your crank, if there's backlash and shit in there. Other than that, because there's 360, that's basically saying 360 degrees or holes. So each hole is 1 degree of a turn. And because this is a 4-cylinder motor, there's 2 ups, and then that completes the cylinder. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's basically fucking 720 turns. So it's pretty fine adjustment. And there's a thing on the side of your block that bolts into that hole called a knock sensor. So there's a thing called pinging, which is basically knocking. It's where you put really low octane fuel in, like 91 octane, 87 octane, and the fuel actually gets set off before it reaches the top of the cylinder. Like, the fuel goes off just from heat and because it can't handle that pressure. So that's called knocking. And the crank angle sensor, well, the knock sensor tells the computer that the motor's knocking. Knocking is really bad for your motor. It fucks up motors pretty quickly. So the knock sensor tells the computer that knocking's happening in the motor, and the crank angle sensor retards the timing a little bit, advances the timing a little bit more, pretty sure. Something like that. So it eliminates the knocking, but you lose power if you retard. I think it's if you retard it you lose power. I don't know. I don't really give a fuck. I'm not here to make power. I'm here to make bitches. Sorry about that. As you're saying, most of the shit, these are called, I went with the electrical system first, like, bought all electrical shit first. This is called an iridium spark plug. Basically, all it is the biggest waste of money you'll ever spend in your life. They're about $3 grand per spark plug. They do nothing for your engine, they just look bling. Or they're about $22 each from Autobahn. You're gonna need them. Don't just get standard NGKs. New Bosch ignition coil, new leads, low resistance. You want like less than 1,000 ohms of resistance per meter. I got 500 ohms, so it's half that. This thing is called an airflow meter. Air flows through it, through that hole. And there's a wire in there. I don't know if you can see it, probably can. But your motor measures the amount of air going into your motor and changes your fuel air ratio to suit it. So I'm sending a text. And if your car backfires, it can break that wire. I've got to make this really quick. If your car backfires and breaks that wire, your car's not going to run very healthy at all. I'm going to start with part 2, but basically pull your motor down, send stuff off to the machinist, send your block off to the machinist, send the head off to the machinist. Basically with the block, all you want to do is, well, I'll talk to this about part 2, but that's part 1.